If you asked anyone in my family, they'd say we were close. At least, that's what our group texts and forced holiday photos would suggest. The truth is, we were only ever united by one thing: my younger brother, Tyler. Everything revolved around him. From the time he was in middle school, my parents propped him up as the golden child. It didn't matter if he dropped out of college or blew through jobs. Tyler's latest journey always mattered more than anything I did. The tipping point came the day my mom gathered us for a family discussion. By us, I mean the usual suspects: my parents, Tyler, and me, the afterthought. She started in with her practiced, soothing tone. Tyler has been under so much stress. We found a mindfulness retreat for him in Colorado. It could really turn things around. But it's expensive. I knew where this was heading before she finished the sentence. I'd been scraping together my savings for over a year, skipping luxuries and extra shifts, because I wanted to make a move of my own, something that didn't revolve around Tyler. Now, as my mom talked about pitching in as a family, all eyes landed on me. Dad nodded, already assuming I'd say yes. Tyler really needs this, honey. Can you help us cover the last $1,200? My mom asked, as if it were obvious. Tyler just stared at the floor, playing the part of the misunderstood genius. A strange calm came over me. I said, I can't help with that. There was silence. Dad's face twisted, confusion morphing into irritation. You mean you won't, he said. I didn't answer. For the first time, I realized how invisible I'd made myself, always smoothing things over, always being the one who chipped in, no matter how I felt. That night, lying in bed, I scrolled through housing listings. I'd been obsessed for months with this one listing, a crumbling, abandoned house an hour out of town. It was only $1,200. Everyone thought it was a scam, but I couldn't stop looking at the pictures. Something about the broken porch, the boarded windows, the wild yard. It was ugly, but it was mine if I wanted it. I stared at my bank balance. I could send the money to my parents for Tyler's retreat, or I could take a risk, just this once for me. The next morning, I bought the house. When I told my family, my mom burst into tears. Tyler looked up, shocked. Dad's voice was flat. You spent your savings on a dump instead of helping your own brother? I nodded, trying not to shake. It's my money. I wanted something for myself for once. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. My mom muttered something about embarrassment and shame. Dad shook his head like I was a stranger. Tyler didn't say a word. But I'd made my choice. I wasn't sorry. I still remember the look on my father's face when I showed him the listing. He didn't even bother to conceal his disgust. He just glanced at the pixelated photos of my new home, scrolled through a few shots of rotten floorboards and graffiti-stained walls, and then set my phone down like it was contagious. Then go live like junk, he said, each word delivered with surgical coldness. My mother's disappointment was quieter but sharper, somehow. She refused to meet my eyes. I just don't understand what's gotten into you, she whispered, shaking her head like she'd failed some unspoken test. Even Tyler, who usually found a way to twist everything back to himself, just stared at the floor, saying nothing. That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. I became invisible. No one spoke to me. No one asked what my plans were. At breakfast, my father wouldn't even look at me. My mother's only words were, I hope you know what you're doing. Tyler scrolled through his phone, pretending I didn't exist. It was as if my decision had erased me from the family ledger. I spent the next day packing my things. There wasn't much: some clothes, a battered laptop, a toolbox I barely knew how to use, and a few old picture frames that still held happier memories. With every item I packed, the anger in my chest turned to something else: resolve, maybe, or just pure stubbornness. I thought, maybe in some twisted way, my parents would change their minds when they saw I was really leaving. Maybe they'd realize how ridiculous it was to exile me over a few $1,000s and a rundown house. But when I walked downstairs with my backpack, my father was waiting by the door. He handed me a set of trash bags for the rest of my stuff. If you want to throw your life away, that's your decision. But don't come crawling back, he said. My mother dabbed her eyes but didn't argue. Tyler didn't even look up. So I left. I loaded my bags into my beat-up car and drove out of the only neighborhood I'd ever known. The junk house sat at the end of a cracked road, surrounded by weeds and silence. It looked worse in person, like a haunted movie set left behind after the crew had packed up. There was a hollow in my chest where my family used to fit, but I refused to let it become regret. That first night, lying on the floor with only a sleeping bag and the sound of rain leaking through the ceiling, I felt the weight of it all. I was alone, but I was free, too. The first morning in the house, I woke up shivering. The smell of damp plaster and old rot was overwhelming, and sunlight struggled to seep through the grime-caked windows. It was nothing like the tidy, climate-controlled comfort of my parents' place. This was survival, plain and simple. I started by walking the perimeter. The porch groaned under my weight. Paint peeled in strips, broken glass littered the floor. Inside, the floors felt like trampolines, soft in places where water had eaten away the boards. In one corner, I discovered a colony of mice had claimed an abandoned armchair. I sat on an overturned bucket, taking it all in. For a few minutes, the magnitude of what I'd done hit me like a punch. This was my life now. There was no heat, no plumbing, and hardly any electricity, just one working outlet in the kitchen that I found by accident. I called in sick to work for a week, burned through vacation days, and made the house my full-time job. Every day, I'd make a list of things that needed fixing, then stare at it, paralyzed. The roof was caving in, the bathroom was a biohazard, and the front door didn't close properly. I had no money left for contractors. Every fix would have to come from me. At first, I failed more than I succeeded. My attempts to patch the roof led to more leaks. I tried unclogging the ancient toilet and ended up spraying myself with rusty water. Neighbors walked by on their way to work, barely glancing at me, just the weird new kid in the dump house. I felt invisible all over again. But something stubborn took root. Maybe it was pride, or maybe just the fear of calling my dad and admitting defeat. I spent hours watching DIY videos on my phone, scribbling down lists of supplies, caulk, tarps, used tools from online classifieds. I scavenged discarded lumber from construction sites, bartered odd jobs for old paint, even dug through the trash for nails and screws. When I needed help moving a broken fridge, I bribed a local teenager with pizza. The days were long and brutal. My hands blistered. My clothes reeked of mold. More than once, I cried in private, angry at the house, my family, and myself. But by the end of that first month, I managed to seal the leaks in the roof, rip out the worst of the rotting floorboards, and get one of the toilets working, sort of. It wasn't much, but it was proof I could do something on my own. Each little fix made the place feel less like a ruin and more like a stubborn declaration. I will not fail. Months crawled by, and slowly, painfully, the junk house started to feel less like a punishment and more like a project I could be proud of. I patched the roof enough to keep the worst of the rain out. I installed a makeshift plumbing system, cobbling together old pipes and salvage fixtures until I had running water. Hot water still a dream, but water nonetheless. I even managed to repaint some walls, scraping years of grime away with a stubbornness I never knew I had. The neighbors, who once averted their eyes when I passed, began nodding at me. "You're fixing the place up," Mrs. Lopez said one afternoon while I was hauling lumber. Didn't think anyone had the guts. For the first time since moving here, I felt a flicker of respect. Not from my family, but from people who didn't care who I was supposed to be. I worked every spare minute, often exhausted and broke, but each day ended with a sense of quiet triumph. I was building more than a house. I was building a version of myself that didn't rely on approval or empty promises. I learned how to patch drywall, solder pipes, and install light fixtures. I made mistakes, of course, but I also made progress. At night, I'd sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, feeling a peace that was foreign but welcome. This house was far from perfect, but it was mine, and I was making it better, slowly, with grit and sweat. Sometimes, I thought about calling my family, maybe to share a picture of the new porch railing or a working sink. But every time, I stopped. Their rejection still stung too deep. I wasn't ready to show them that their harsh judgment had only pushed me to prove them wrong. My brother's retreat was long over now, but no one talked about it. No updates, no pictures, no gratitude. The retreat had been his big story, and I'd become the family outcast. Yet here I was, standing tall in the rubble of a house everyone called junk. For the first time in years, I felt like I was winning, not by their rules, but by my own. Word has a way of slipping through the cracks, even when you want to be invisible. I started noticing subtle changes in the way relatives, once indifferent or openly critical, began bringing up my junk house in conversations with my parents. "Have you seen what she's done with that place?" my aunt casually asked over the phone one afternoon. It's almost unrecognizable. At first, my parents dismissed the chatter with practiced nonchalance. But I caught the tension in their voices during family gatherings. There were glances exchanged over the dinner table, whispers behind closed doors. Their embarrassment seemed to slowly shift into something else, curiosity, maybe even envy. One Sunday, my mother called me. Her voice was tentative, uncertain. We heard the house looks better. Maybe we should come see it sometime. I wanted to laugh. After everything, after the cold shoulders, the insults, the silent treatment, they suddenly wanted a piece of the place they'd written off. I told her I wasn't sure that was a good idea, and the line went quiet. Later, my dad called too, less polite, more demanding. You've got to understand, this isn't just about the house. Tyler might need a place to get away, to detox. We could really use the space. The audacity left me breathless. After years of rejection, now they wanted a key, wanted to use the house like it was some kind of family asset, something they could borrow and lend like a trophy. It felt like a punch to the gut, but I stayed calm. I declined their requests quietly but firmly. I wasn't about to hand over the only place that had ever felt like mine. Behind their veiled apologies and half-hearted compliments, I heard the same old refrain, "You owe us." But I didn't owe anyone, not after everything they'd said and done. For the first time, the power had shifted. I wasn't the kid begging for approval anymore. I was the one holding something they wanted, and I wasn't giving it back. When my family finally asked to come by, I knew things had changed, but not enough to erase the bitterness that had piled up over the months. The message came wrapped in polite words, but the meaning was clear. Can we come by? Maybe for a visit. The truth was, they wanted the house as a fallback for Tyler. A quiet place for his detox, they said. I wasn't blind to the irony that the same people who had cast me out for buying a junk house now saw it as a convenient solution to their problems. I didn't reply right away. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut with no explanation, but I also wanted to show them I wasn't the same scared kid anymore. So, I wrote back, carefully measured, "I'm glad you're thinking of Tyler's well-being, but this house is my home, and I'm not comfortable sharing it. I hope you understand." The silence on the other end was deafening. Days passed without a response. Then came a call from my mother, voice softer than before, tinged with desperation. "We just want to support Tyler, your family, and we thought maybe you could help." I could feel my pulse in my throat. "I've done my part by creating a safe place, but that doesn't mean I owe you anything. This house is my choice, my peace. If you can't respect that, then I guess we're further apart than ever." I hung up, hands trembling not with fear, but with a fierce kind of freedom. For the first time, I was setting the boundaries. The doors were literally and figuratively locked. I didn't want to hold grudges. I wanted respect. And after everything, that was all I needed. Standing on the creaky porch, I looked out over the yard that had once been a tangle of weeds and broken glass. Now, patches of wildflowers pushed through cracked concrete, and the freshly painted porch railing caught the late afternoon sun like a beacon. The house wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was mine. Every splinter, every nail, every scraped knuckle had built this place from the ground up. The silence inside was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. I thought about the long, lonely nights, the endless sweat and frustration, and how every bit of that had shaped me. My family's rejection had been a blow, but it had pushed me towards something real, something I owned, not just in property, but in spirit. Tyler's retreat came and went, but I never heard a word about how it changed him. My parents' calls became fewer, more cautious. I stopped waiting for their approval or forgiveness. Instead, I built a life defined by my own terms. I locked the front door, the old bolt sliding into place with a satisfying click. The house was more than shelter, it was a symbol, a monument to standing tall when the world told me to crumble. No one had to understand it. I finally did. I wasn't the kid who spent money on a junk house. I was the person who turned rubble into home, the person who refused to be invisible. And that was enough.